Hello and welcome to the Sex Manifesto, where we explore the unspoken issues affecting our bodies, sex lives and identities. I'm your host, Sarah Vaci. Just a little heads up, the Sex Manifesto does cover some adult themes and you might hear some explicit language. Now on with the show. So I think, Rich, I know you through one of the least sexy sex-related topics there are. Would you agree?
I would totally agree. I've been accused of being not as sexy as I could be, so yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your like who you are and your background and stuff.
So my name is Richard Mancuso, and I was not really anything prominent up until maybe 2016. And I had taken part in an experimental vaccine for herpes simplex. And it was an experimental immunotherapeutic vaccine to help treat people who were suffering from frequent symptoms. So after the treatment and after I saw results, I had made a promise to my friend Augustine and the founder and the person who created the vaccine, which was Dr. Halford. I had made a promise to them that if it worked, that I would talk publicly about it. And I had to eat my words because it worked, and now I talk about it. So
So you were not such a prominent I had the impression that it's been years and years and years that you're like a spokesperson for like herpes awareness. So it's a relatively recent thing.
Since 2016, yeah. I was actually one of the people who you would typically hear about all the time. I didn't want anything to do with herpes. I didn't want anybody talking about it. If somebody, like one of my friends, had known about it and they started making jokes about it, I was like, didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to do anything. And now I talk about it publicly everywhere.
Yeah, well, I went through quite a process when I was diagnosed, and I thought I could go two ways with this, and I could just go with the shame direction. And admittedly, whenever I told a friend, I did that hushed voice thing, like, oh God, everything's gone wrong with my relationship, and he gave me herpes, in that kind of quiet, awkward tone. And then I reflected on that, and I realized that I'm perpetuating the stigma just by my demeanor and how I was telling people in this, like, oh my goodness. And then I started to like process and think about why that particular STD, I prefer to just think of it as a virus and not necessarily because of all the different ways that you can actually contract it. It's not necessarily just an STD. And I've started also becoming a bit of a spokesperson and clarifying for people, and even going public on Facebook, which was quite a big deal. I still had people saying, oh, I've had cold sores, but I don't have that. and
that's always a good kicker. That's a great conversation starter. I was in a bar, and there's a bunch of people, and they were talking about something, and she's like, oh, my lip kind of hurts. And somebody goes, oh, you probably got a cold sore. And she's like, yeah, probably. I'm like, no, you probably have herpes. And she's like, oh, she got all mad. And I was like, well, that's what it is, right? And everybody just went quiet. Everybody was like, now everyone's listening. They were just staring at me. I'm like, uh-oh, what did I do?
I'm waiting for the punchline, like, you went home with her anyway.
Yeah. No, but it actually turned out to be a very interesting conversation. But just like you had said, like all of a sudden, when you said the H word, everybody was like, oh no, you mean herpes, and it got a little strange. And you're absolutely right. It just perpetuated and fed into the whole idea that it's this terrible thing.
I mean, even when I was diagnosed, the nurse or healthcare assistant said, "Oh, we don't say herpes because," and I was just shocked that in the medical profession, they're still not trying to tackle something that it should be so much more normalized. The other shocking thing for me was that because I've been tested for not say many times, quite a few times, and they don't test, at least in the UK, they don't test for herpes. And I asked them why, and they said because behavior doesn't change and it's really common. And the funny thing is, I feel like it still has more stigma than something like gonorrhea or chlamydia and all of these. And I'm still myself trying to unpick why that particular STD is the pariah or whatever the word is, you know? Like, is that something? Tell me a bit about like when you were diagnosed and what your experiences have been.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do, that perception that a lot of people have when they hear the word has to do with, I don't know in England how they do it over there, but over here in the United States, well, I'm a little bit older, so when in grade school, when you hit a certain age, they had sex education class. And when they had that class, understandably, it was kind of a joke because you have a bunch of teenagers and you have a bunch of young adults who are just yelling out, you know, body parts and making fun and like, oh, there's a picture of a penis and oh, there's a vagina, and like everybody was just like being completely ridiculous. And then where I went to parochial school, believe it or not, I went to a very religious school, and their idea of teaching human sexuality was basically, if you have sex before marriage, you're going to hell. But let's show the slides and let's talk about the human body. So I'm sitting there and I'm a kid and I'm like, what? Didn't make any sense. So then they proceed to show you the awful pictures, the extreme pictures of gonorrhea and syphilis. And then they go, oh, this is herpes. Oh, and they show the blisters and they show like the worst case scenarios. So, of course, kids who have gone through that, you know, they're going to make fun of it. That can't happen to me. And then later on in life, when it does happen, now you're like, uh-oh, I'm that person now. So the stigma is already kind of sort of, that's one of its many points in time where it is. But I believe that when I got first diagnosed, I was about 17 going on 18. And the first incident, I didn't know what it was. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, oh, it's just a heat rash. Just put this stuff on it and get out of my office. I was just like, okay. So a few years had gone by, and then I ended up getting the typical type of herpes outbreak, which was on my left buttock, and it was just in a cluster of blisters. I thought I had been bitten by a spider because it was a huge, sharp pain, and by the end of the day, I had this cluster of blisters, and I was like, oh, I must have got bit at work. And it turned into this whole spider thing, and everybody was making jokes about spiders and blah, 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 blah. It was like not a big deal. So then I go to the doctor the next day, and he's like, yeah, you got herpes. Here you go. Here's the prescription. I'm like, well, he just walked out of the office. I'm like, well, where are you going? I have questions. Like, and now I'm thinking back to those pictures. And I remember the teachers like saying, you know, and this is one of the really messed up things about how people can have their own particular perceptions on human sexuality and place them upon other people. So we kind of expect teachers to be a little bit higher brow than that, but they're just people. And if you have a teacher that has this very archaic view of human sexuality, and if you are in a religious type of setting, you're going to be called a whore and a slut and a dirty person, and you're marked for life and all of these terrible, terrible things. So you don't realize it, but all of those feelings that you on those things that you had heard before are now coming back.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Like I felt like I've had to justify, oh, I only caught it from 5 minutes of oral. It's not like I was having loads of sex. You know, I have other medical conditions that means that it's not actually that easy for me to have loads of sex, especially not with plenty of random people or anything. But then, you know, me saying that also makes me feel like, well, why do I have to even, so what if I'm having loads of sex with random people? That shouldn't even be an issue. And yet I you know, I shamed myself, and then I feel like so what I tend to tell people is, oh, did you know that you can self-infect and having never had sex? Okay, it's probably a bit more convoluted and it may not happen that easily, But, the guy I was with, he had a bit of a cold sore, and we assumed, well, we didn't put two and two together. Let's put it that way.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah.
the other
Which is
thing
fine. Happens. It
yeah, so
happens. Yeah, it happens all the time.
and the fact that you could say, well, I've had cold sores in the past, but I hardly ever have them. And you think that it's only when there's a really obvious outbreak that you could pass that on to someone. So that was one mistake that we made. And then the other thing I was going to say, I've just forgotten what it was. It was about the shame angle. Oh, yeah. So when I was very poorly and I told the doctor, can you just, I think it's probably herpes. Can you swab, and double check? And the doctor didn't want it to be. So he was like, no, I'm sure that's not it. That I'm sure you're fine. Don't worry about it. And I was like, no, please. Like, I was so ill and I'd been tested. I'd been to the doctor 4 times.
Oh, wow.
And I was the one who said, look, I really, ticks all the boxes. But for my sake, they didn't want that because they obviously feel like, not it's a death sentence, obviously, but it's like a really heavy burden to carry for the rest of your life. And of course, all those awkward conversations that you have to have with people
Yep.
when you've been diagnosed. So how have you found like dating after you were diagnosed?
Oof. Ooh, you're going to jump right into that.
Well, everyone wants, even the people
Yeah.
who do not have it. I mean, there's a hell of a lot of people, let's be clear, who have it and don't know.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's the people
Well,
who do have it
mm-hmm.
and how they
Yeah.
have those first conversations.
I think one of the best ways I can describe it, I was actually having somebody had contacted me on Facebook, and she was freaking out. She says, "Oh, I saw you on TikTok or Facebook or wherever it was she saw me." And she's like, "Can I ask you a couple questions? I don't understand. Like, how am I going to date again? How am I going to have a relationship? Blah 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 blah." So we're having a conversation, and she's completely beside herself. I mean, in not a great way. You can tell by when you're talking to somebody and they're really upset and they don't know where to connect to. And I was like, okay, just take a deep breath and just breathe. And I says, before we continue, let me just give you some facts. Just little quick facts. I says, number one, herpes is pretty much everywhere. Okay, so unless you plan on living on a desert island somewhere by yourself, you're going to get herpes because herpes is a human condition. You're going to get it. If you're going to be in contact with people, you're going to kiss them hello, you're going to have intimate relationships, it's going to happen. Now, whether you have, and she wasn't very clear on what kind of a condition she had. I think she had just been tested, but she never had an outbreak. So she was freaking out. And I said, herpes has been around for 6 million years. It has the ability to infect people without them knowing it. And most people, when they catch it, they never see any signs of that infection taking place. And she was like, what? She's like, no, I thought people got infected and they had an immediate outbreak and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no. Most people actually have a high tolerance and a very good immune response to it. It's only a very low percentage, unfortunately, myself included, fall into a very 1 to 2% of the human population that actually suffer from frequent outbreaks. But I would still make the argument that I believe it's 3 to 4% because there's a lot of people that don't go to the doctor.
Yeah.
So she was like, oh my God, how am I going to date? I'm like, you're going to date just like everybody else. I says, all you have to do is just have the conversation. Say, look, do you know what cold sores are? Yeah, well, that's herpes. And I've been diagnosed, but I don't have any symptoms or signs.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can gauge the conversation to see where and how far that's going to go. Because people who experience outbreaks and people who experience herpes on an intimate level know exactly what it is. We may not know all the details. Some people may not know all the science, but you kind of have an idea what it is. When you're talking to somebody and telling them this, you have to kind of assume they know absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest part. Because if you're talking, let's say that you and I just met, and I was like, wow, I really like this girl. We're getting along great, and we're having all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, shit. I got to tell her about this thing that I have. What is she going to do? What is she going to say? How's she going to act? Is she going to blast me all over Facebook? You know what I mean? Like, there's this avalanche of things that are going through somebody's head. And 9 times out of 10, when you end up telling somebody, they either, one, they say, oh, I have that too. Or they know what it is, and they may not be inclined to acquiesce to your request, or they may be that type of person that's going to get up and walk out and never contact you again. But that's the risk that you take. But that's the risk that we take all the time in dating anyway.
That's true.
Regardless of herpes, you know what I mean? Regardless of that, herpes doesn't change your value, and you're not wasting someone else's time. I say this all the time to people when they talk about dating. Oh, I want to tell them right away because I don't want to waste their time. I says, there's your mistake right there. You're thinking that you're wasting their time. What about your time?
Yeah.
Where's your value? You both have equal value.
I actually, yeah. The funny thing is, and this is, so two things, like I actually quite admire, this is going to sound really weird. I kind of admire viruses. Like they're so clever. So that's one thing, which is a very strange, but I'm like really into science. So,
yep.
You know, it's like,
academically speaking, you can kind of respect how the millions of years of evolution have taken its time to get to where it is today. It is one of the most successful viruses on the planet.
Yeah, so that's
its host without killing it. That's amazing.
Yeah,
but
so that's one thing.
When you have it, but then you have it, you're like, oh.
But I was the other thing that I feel is important is I'm seeing it almost as a positive, that I am so in tune with my body that I know if I'm about to have an outbreak, I know exactly how to deal with it. And if I have any other issues, if I've got any pain or itchiness, I mean, I went through hell when I was diagnosed, and I researched and I investigated and I looked and I thought, and I went through all the medications for nearly anything you can think of. So in some ways, being so educated means that whoever I'm seeing someone now, and I feel like it's really great. I mean, he actually researched herpes. Hats off to him, you know, that he went and he read about it, and we're having fantastic like open dialogue about you know, the future and what kind of contraception we may use and things like that. So I mean, I'm very lucky in having someone who's so open to talking about all of these things and who didn't just freak out. Although when you do tell someone, you do still have your stomach, I always forget what the phrase is, like it flips, or you have cold hands. Well, no, that's quite positive, isn't it? Oh. I mean, your hands go cold, you're right. And you're like, is this about to just end? You know, and it's there's a huge level of trepidation because you're like, oh, what's gonna happen? Yeah, I mean, at what stage? You've got fantastic website, asking for a friend, yeah, and then that has quite a long letter on there, from what I recall, of how you tell someone. At what stage in the dating, you know, date 3, or how, you know, after the first kiss? Have you got any guidance on that? Yeah. So there's two main areas of thought that people are having. One is to dump your purse out all over the counter after you say hello to this person, which I don't recommend doing. But not because I'm trying to make a personal stance on dating or anything, because I'll just be honest, I'm not a dating expert. If I was, I would probably have someone with me right now. But when you look at all there's a huge amount of, a lot of it's anecdotal, but there's a lot of dating experts, and there is actual data on dating in human interactions and understanding behavior. So after looking into that, that's why I say, you know what, after everything that I've looked into, it tells me that that's not really a great idea. It may work for you if you are somebody that's into hookup culture, which is totally fine.
then that's going to be something that's going to be on the top of your list to do. Like if you're in a situation to where you're just looking to hook up and the other person's looking to hook up, then yeah, that's going to be your best course of action, and say, hey, listen, before this happens, I need to just let you know about this, so I'm not hiding anything from you, even though this is just going to be a quick romp in the hay and we're going to have some fun. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The other way, the other side of the coin, is that if you're going to, how do I want to put this? You just meet somebody, right? And you're like, okay, the first thing is either the attraction, maybe who they are or whatever it is. There's some value to what you're seeing at that person. Even if it's just physical, there's something there to start.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not allowing that person to see what value that you have, somebody who has herpes,
Mm-hmm.
then when you do finally disclose and say that you have herpes, everything about you is now just herpes. What about who you are?
If you do it too soon, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. What about who you are, or what you do, or what are your hobbies?
Mm-hmm.
Do you make stick figures? Do you have a rabbit collection? You know what I mean? Like, there's so many aspects to what people are. Like, do you read? Do you like movies? Do you like the same thing I do? So there's a lot of things that may be in value to that person, but without letting them know what that is, there's nothing to go on.
Mm-hmm.
So they have it's very easy for someone to ghost you. So if you're that type of person and you're telling me, oh yeah, I figured we'd hang out, let's go have dinner. So we go have dinner, we talk a little bit, and you're like, oh, by the way, I have herpes. And I'm like, I don't know anything about you except for the few things that you told me, and herpes. So it makes it very easy for me to say, listen, I had a nice time, I'll see you later, and just get up and walk away. Mm-hmm. There's no loss. But if you get to know somebody after a few times, you talk to them for a week, you go on 2 or 3 dates, now you also have the opportunity to go, okay, I've spent some time with this person, and I thought that I liked them, but I kind of don't see myself with them anymore after this point, because we're too different. We have too many differences, or we're not in sync. And you didn't even have to tell them you had herpes, because you already established the fact that you're just not compatible. So you're actually doing yourself a really great service by spending some time and getting to know that person, even if it's just for a little while. So yeah, I would recommend at least talking to somebody off and on for a week, go on a few dates, and then see if you have any kind of compatibility. Because by that time, you may have shown that person that, hey, listen, I have some value that you may be interested in.
Yeah. And am I right in thinking, so you were diagnosed around 17, so of course you're only about 25 now, and so you've had, let's say, about
thank you.
So let's say you've had about 20 years of dating.
20. You're funny.
So how have you what can you tell me any situations or stories? Or I seem to remember you saying that the doctors said you don't have to disclose.
Here is the
right?
craziest thing. Yeah, so thank you for being kind, because I'm a bit older.
I'm older than I look. I'm older than I look.
Yes. Are you?
I'm 43.
What? I'm 51, so I never would have guessed that you were even close to that.
Thank
that's
you.
Funny.
Thank you.
That's funny.
Mutual Appreciation Society right here.
We're just patting each other on the back, yay.
It's the herpes.
So,
it's keeping us young.
See that? See, people are missing out. So I think, so there was a huge time frame. Well, listen, I'm just going to be honest. When I was about 17, 18 years old, up until, my sister would probably make the argument a few years ago, I was very stupid. I was a dumb kid. Didn't have much knowledge, didn't have any life experiences. I was actually brought up in a very abusive home, and I was thrown out. So when I was thrown out into the world, I didn't have any life lessons. I didn't have any guidance on how to navigate this world. I was like a wild badger thrown into the woods and just say, go be free, with no guidance whatsoever. So, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have pagers, we didn't have computers, we didn't have the internet. And if you wanted to look up any kind of information, you had to hop on your bicycle and ride your ass to the library.
Mm.
And even then, the information wasn't really that great.
I
So
remember those days.
yeah, so we depended upon the kindness of doctors and people who knew or thought that they knew what they were talking about. So for 20 something years, my whole thing was I didn't have to tell anybody, which is a terrible thing. So it wasn't until I hit about 30 and I was like, with my late 20s, early 30s, I was like, I've been pretty lucky with dating, and there was a few girlfriends that knew. But then there was times where you'd go out and you wouldn't even bring it up, like, oh, you out of sight, out of mind. And I was like, thinking back, that's a terrible thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, you have this condition, but I didn't know that. The doctors never informed us. You know what I mean? They just said, listen, everybody has herpes, don't worry about it, just go live your life. And that was the lesson that we took with us. And then, the internet comes around and we start learning things, and then I start studying viruses, and I'm like, oh my God, this is a little bit more entailed than I thought. And then, of course, you grow and you become more attentive and more caring about your partner. So if you're not going to care about yourself, why are you going to care about your partner? So you start to learn about that. You have all these experiences. So dating, it was just off and on, and just... It wasn't anything.
And have you ever? So I signed up a while ago to one of the sort of STD herpes dating sites, but then I thought I don't necessarily want that to be the thing that we have in common. Much as it sounds like, oh, then you might be a bit less worried about passing it on or catching it. But to me, that didn't feel like the best. Like, have you ever been on one of those dating sites?
I did, and I can tell you, I can tell you my personal experience, and I can tell you that I had the same impression you did, and it seemed like the complete opposite of what you would do when you're dating someone else. Like, you're trying to show all of these other things about you that are more important than that. Meanwhile, these herpes dating sites are just all about, number one is right in the forefront, is herpes. And there's a good side to it and there's a bad side, right? So the good side is that you've gotten it out of the way. That's one less thing that you have to talk about. Now we have to see if we get along. Do we like each other? Are we going to kill each other? Is sex going to be good? Is it going to be bad? We don't know. But the bad side is that it just seems like it's really making that important. And I understand, and it's going to sound a little funny, but when people say herpes isn't a big deal, and then people on the other side say, well, herpes is a big deal, and then they start fighting, and they go.
Which side? So you're on the isn't a big deal side, presumably.
Well, I'm on the side that they're both correct.
Okay.
Because it has to do with their personal experience. So you have the same virus that hasn't changed. Well, within the last 1,000 years or so, it hasn't changed that much, except for a couple of strains of type 1 and type 2 that have become antiviral resistant, but that's a whole nother conversation. But it's basically the same virus infecting human beings, and two groups of individuals are having, one group is having issues because their immune system is not that great, or they just didn't get a good look at the virus and the immune system wasn't able to make all the antibodies to fight it. And then you have another group of people to where they're doing just fine. Same virus, two different groups of people. So it's so funny. It's like everyone's arguing over oxygen when some people have asthma and some people don't. So the person who is having a bad experience with herpes, that's a real thing. That's really happening. So it is a big deal to them. And then people who aren't having a problem with it say, oh, it's not a big deal. Well, it's true. It's not a big deal to them.
Yeah.
It's really about
one
your
of the
personal
lucky
experience.
Ones. Yeah. I mean, in one sense, I'm one of the lucky ones because I've only had one big outbreak and then recently managed to nip it in the bud, so to speak. But yeah, you had quite a rough time with it. Is that right? I
did. Yeah, I was getting 2 to 3 outbreaks a month for 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then everything changed with this vaccine.
Yeah. So I was dealing with a lot because there was times I could take antiviral drugs and it would make the outbreaks go away, but after 6 months of taking them, I was getting really bad side effects. I was getting migraines. I was getting my liver enzymes were rising, and I had to stop taking antivirals. I was having all kinds of issues. So if I was dating somebody and taking antivirals, I was okay, but eventually I'd have to stop taking them because it was destroying me. So I was in the middle of off and on relationships, and I was in the middle of off and on in pain, and I was dealing with suicide. I was dealing with all of these thoughts. Like I was actually at the end of my rope, and there was a time right before I found out about the vaccine that I was going to eat a bullet. That's how bad it was. Had gotten to me, and I was almost right there. And even when I was younger, I talk about it in the book. I had the tree picked out. I had the rope in the back of my car. So these are real things that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was in a Facebook group, and I have type 2, by
Yeah.
the way. Not that there's really much of a difference between type 1 and type 2. That's a whole different conversation.
I think
That
type 1
people
is the
kind
one that's usually oral, isn't it?
Usually.
Usually. Because that's the one
Yeah, but
I think I have. Yeah.
doctors don't, when doctors see oral herpes, they don't swab it. They just assume it's type 1, but they're finding out that a lot of cases are actually type 2
Yeah, yeah.
because they're starting to really get into diagnosis, and they're seeing that there's cross references. But anyway, I don't want to.
Yeah, carry on with your story. Yeah.
So, and I would get them above my eye, on my eyebrow, and I would get them here, and they would be, they were pretty intense. And I was showing a picture. I was talking to somebody in one of the Facebook groups that talk about cures and vaccines and all these other things. And I had posted a picture, and somebody had said, "Oh, that's not type 2. You don't get type 2, blah 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 blah." And I'm like, "No. That's type 2. You can get type 2. You can get herpes anywhere in your body."
Mm.
So that in turned to a very strange argument that took over. And one of the moderators of the group, her name was Carolyn, and she saw my story and she saw the picture, and she contacted me in Facebook Messenger, and she said, "Hey, listen. There's this Dr. Halford that I know. He's been working on herpes for the last 20 years. He's a real doctor. He's a real scientist. He has all this tons of data, and we think he's figured it out on how to help people that are suffering." And I was like, "Wow, that's awesome. How do I sell my soul and get in on that?" So she's like, "Listen, I'm going to give him your information, and he's going to be doing an offshore trial. You may be able to get in there." So she gave me his number, and we started talking, and I did a 3-hour interview with him on the phone, and I got accepted into the trial. And believe it or not, the very first vaccination was in 2016 on April 1st, which I continually make jokes about.
Yeah.
And Dr. Halford at the time, I used to joke with him about it as well. He ended up dying a year later from sinonasal undifferentiated carcinoma, which is a cancer behind the eyes. And I didn't even know the entire time that he was sick, and he was constantly working on trying to help a bunch of people that he didn't even know.
Wow.
And that blew my mind, which was another reason why I gave him my word that I would talk about this, because nobody was talking about it. Nobody was talking about the vaccine and what it did for them. And I get it. I was kind of mad at the 17 people that were in the trial who didn't come forward and talk about. I was the only one.
Oh, right.
But after seeing what the trolls and everybody did to me within the first year of coming out publicly, I totally understand why they didn't want to go public.
Yeah. But tell me what happened after the vaccine.
So, excuse me. So, I got the first shot in April, and then another shot, and then another shot, about 30 to 90 days apart. And I didn't see immediate results like some of the other people in the trial. There was two or three people in my group that as soon as they got the shot, they saw immediate results. They stopped getting outbreaks completely. And a few of them are still in remission today, which is amazing. because these people
Wow.
were getting outbreaks all the time.
So
They're
he really
in
picked
freaking
people who are
remission.
suffering. Like,
Yes.
yeah. Uh-huh.
He didn't pick people. If you do research and look at, there's a vaccine called Gen 3, Genesea, it didn't do well. But they picked people who hardly got any outbreaks, which didn't make any sense to me. Why you would do a trial that way?
You mean
That
with
doesn't
the
make any
other
sense.
with the other vaccine?
With the other vaccine, the Gen 3 vaccine.
Right.
The vaccine I got was called Theravax, but they changed the name later on because now it's RVX, Rational Vaccines 201.
Mm-hmm.
But the vaccine that I had received, which took, let me see if I can tell you. So what I did was, I know this is going to be a selfless promotion, but in the book, in the appendix, I go through exact details of, I even show pictures of where the injection was on my leg.
Oh, that's just your leg.
These are the injection sites on my leg, yeah.
Okay, just because if we go and put this on YouTube, I don't want. We have to be careful what the pictures are.
No, that's my leg.
Well, I don't know. Do you know what? I have a belly button video, and that's been flagged up, and it's just my belly button.
Oh my God, that's insane.
Well, for some people,
actually,
your leg, Rich. For some people, your leg.
This is so it's under the skin. It's a dermal injection that was directly underneath the top layer of the skin.
Okay.
And so the redness that you're seeing there is a common inflammatory response, which is a good response because that was the response that Dr. Halford was looking for. That means that my immune system is finally seeing this inactive virus. Mm-hmm. So it's actually retraining your immune system on how to fight the virus and be normal like everyone else.
Yeah.
So
but the virus is still in your body. So the virus is still in your body, and it's just like massively reduced. I don't know how that vaccine works, and I'm wondering if it's anything similar to the COVID vaccine where you can still get the virus, but it reduces it. It's not the same. Okay.
No,
I don't know enough about it all.
Yeah. No, that's okay. That's an RNA. Your body's actually making pieces of something. That's a whole different conversation.
Oh yeah. No, I know. I know a little bit about that. But what's happening with the vaccine now?
Well, now, it's so funny. Like, so 2016, they had the original trial. Dr. Halford had passed away, and he had turned over the company. He had asked Augustine, who was a friend of mine, he asked him to just take over. So now if you actually go to rationalvaccines.com, they have one of the largest science teams around. And if you look at the people that are on the science team, these are the top dogs in the country that have been working on herpes for the last 20 years. Now, it sounds like I'm being a little biased, and maybe I am, but I suggest to anybody, if they're not sure, the data, the science, and they just released some new data that Dr. Carr has been working on with ocular herpes, and they have seen such great results that I think hopefully within the next year the trials are going to start up again. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping, fingers crossed, I don't know if this is going to happen or not, but possibly over in England, they're going to be doing a trial, and hopefully, since England is not as strict as the FDA, we may see a vaccine available within the next maybe 5 to 10 years.
Oh,
hopefully.
Right. And does the vaccine reduce your transmissibility? Is that a word? Like, do you know if you're less likely to pass it on?
I would imagine yes. They're going to have to prove, I mean, anything with science. I will say this, in my opinion, if you understand the virus and you understand the activity, which brings about shedding, and active shedding and viral shedding and asymptomatic shedding, these are all things that occur when the virus becomes active. So if you have the virus and it's not active, and not active as much as it used to be, then obviously you're not shedding as much, which means you're not as contagious as much. So your percentages are lower.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that the answer to that would be yes, that your transmissibility would be very low due to the vaccine working. Absolutely.
Cool.
That would be my
That's
guess.
cool.
But again, they're going to have to prove it, which I think that I'm pretty confident they will.
Yeah. And I really want to talk about the stigma around herpes and what do you think can be done to, because as I said before, I feel like it's it's seen as one of the worst or most stigmatized STDs more than the others, which it would be interesting to speak. I don't know if you have spoken to any young people,
Oh,
you
sure.
know, like 17 and 18-year-olds in your Facebook group. When young people are diagnosed, they have a similar they're devastated because of the stigma rather than just the idea that they have to take treatment forever. So
I think there's a very big difference. Now, you and I are obviously a little bit older than somebody who's 17 right now, but
I feel 17 on the inside.
I do. Isn't that
No,
nuts?
I don't. I feel about 24 on the inside.
24. That's a good age.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun.
It was.
Yeah, it really was. What I notice from younger people, and is that they're not as, I mean, geez, it's on such a weird scale, because we have so many social movements right now, right, compared to what it used to be. You have Black Lives Matter, you have Time's Up, you have Me Too, you have a lot of political, socioeconomic movements that are out there, and the interesting thing is that the younger generation has really kind of risen to the charge for these type of things. And it seems like they have learned that speaking up and not being afraid is a thing. You know what I mean? And for them, that situation is different. And then what I see from talking with younger people, they're either completely, utterly devastated, or they're just like, it's just herpes, I don't care. It's a very weird dynamic. I think I would love to see a study done with from 17 to 25-year-olds to actually see what their perception is, and if it's comparable to what our perceptions were at that age. And it's very possible, but we're in social media now. I mean, everybody's putting everything out there. You're either talking about your genitals, you're talking about herpes, or you're twerking, or you're shoving your boobs in everybody's face. You know what I mean? It's like everybody's not afraid to show something. You know, you have people showing underarm hair. You have people dancing. It's a very different atmosphere now.
Yeah, except you did say that on social media it's still a bit dead in the water. It's almost like it's not a armpit hair is sort of what's the word?
It's easier to.
It's kind of a sexier sell, not in the sense that the armpit hair, of which I have some. Not that in particular is sexy. For some people it might be, but it's like in vogue. Let's say it's kind of a more of a trendy thing, or like nipples or something. And yet herpes is just not, it's not a cool taboo, if that's even a phrase. So you said that, people are secretly watching all these videos and getting all this information. And yet it would be interesting to see who's doing, who's openly doing TikTok videos. As you said, you're doing TikTok videos.
There's a few herpes advocates that are actually doing them. The thing, so like you said before, I look on my data, and I can see on my website how many hits I get per month. So the 1 month I was getting like 3,000 to 4,000. 1 month I was getting 5,000. 1 month I was getting 4,000. It just varies, but you see the data and you see the clicks. But then when you go to Facebook and you go to TikTok and you go to Twitter and you go to Instagram, you're not really seeing a ton of likes. But when I look at the data, all of the views, so people are watching it. They're listening. The podcasts, they're listening to them, they're watching them, but they're not commenting because they don't want people to know that they commented on it.
Yeah. Well, this is what
So
I'm
they're
really
still-
interested. Yeah, I'm really interested in how herpes is. Well, I think it's associated with slut shaming, which is not a phrase that
Oh.
I. Well, you know, it's like it's got that idea that you got it from sleeping around, and I know that's a really big topic. And I actually feel like the stigma around herpes is actually the stigma around sex. So it's not about
I
the
agree.
herpes. You know, we could go down a whole like it's the patriarchy and how it's worse for women. Like
Absolutely.
I think it is.
Here-
Do you feel like it's worse? From your group and what you've seen? Do you think it's worse for women to have a diagnosis or not? That's not the right phrase, but are we judged
It's
more?
worse. Both. I think it's both. When you talk about the stigma, a lot of people will go back and say, oh, well, the stigma started when Burroughs Wellcome invented antivirals. And everybody's like, oh, because of the campaign, they did a marketing campaign, they were in Time Magazine, the Scarlet Letter, and they did
I don't know.
very...
Tell me a bit more about that, because
So the Burroughs Wellcome invented, they figured out how to invent antivirals for herpes. And they weren't doing very well in sales. So they went on a conservative right-wing campaign to shame and create this dichotomy that if herpes is bad and you need antivirals, and if you have herpes...
wow, I did not know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, there's a whole thing. I have the original Time magazine, the Scarlet Letter, it's a very interesting read because they just really go after morality and human sexuality and you're a whore and you're a slut and blah 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 blah, and they kind of word it a little differently, but they really attack it. But the thing is that I don't believe entirely that the stigma was started by Burroughs Wellcome. I don't buy it. I believe that it was pouring gas on a small fire. Absolutely. It was definitely a catalyst. But when we talk about shame and we talk about sexuality, it's human sexuality. We have thousands and thousands of years of people shaming, and it's called the Madonna-whore dichotomy.
I know,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes, it is a... geez, I wish I could find my notes here. But basically, so virginity, the idea of virginity started off with one simple word, the hymen, right?
Yeah.
Everybody started making a big deal about the hymen. Virgin sacrifices.
Oh no, I know all
and-
that. Yeah. No, I know
Yeah.
that's the funnily enough, just quickly, so the marketing thing that you said, that the same thing happened with female body hair. So the razor companies, did you know this? That the razor companies wanted to sell more razors. So they said, oh, we don't just think men should remove their hair. How about women? And so that was another marketing. We can blame all the marketing executives. No, but
it's
I
clever
agree
marketing.
that it's so in terms of like obviously for women it is very different, the whole virginity and everything, sexuality and everything like that.
Well, it's just the idea. It's the idea that, you know, if you're not a virgin, you're not, your value is, you don't have any value, which is completely ridiculous, because all the hymen is just something to keep poop and pee out of an infant's private area. That's all it's there for. It doesn't have any value as to what you are as a person. Yeah, it's just ridiculous. So the human sexuality and shame is something that has started way before. I mean, the idea of what promiscuous behavior is, the questioning of morality. Shame is the biggest contributor. But
do you think men I mean, do you think that in your life experience, not necessarily in your studies or whatever, but have you felt judged for, you know, if people made judgments on you after you've said, like, have you been aware of that people have judged you for when you've said that you have herpes? Well, I just mean that for me to say it maybe carries a different weight to if you said it.
it's yeah. Well, it's kind of unfortunate that that level of equality is so different, isn't it? You know what I mean? When when guys find out other guys have herpes, it's like oh yeah, you screwed up. You had sex with somebody who's dirty. And it's like, really? Where did that come from? So now,
Have you
all of a
heard,
sudden that
literally
blame.
heard that?
Oh sure,
Yeah.
yeah. So now the guys are actually, again, the Madonna whore dichotomy.
Mm.
Now men are shaming women who aren't even there
Mm.
to keep that level of masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
How interesting is that? But
Yeah.
I've had people now, and women, well, women aren't as vocal. They'll be like, "Oh, I'm not sleeping with him. He's been around too much."
Yeah.
Again, promiscuous behavior. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's just not enough time to really kind of dig into this, but
I know. Do you challenge men? Like if you see, let's say in your Facebook group, or even, I don't know, down the pub when we used to go to pubs, have you ever challenged the men who talk about women like that?
depends. Yeah, if they say something stupid, sure.
But like if they're
I've said,
if they're judging women for having herpes.
oh yeah. Well, the herpes thing doesn't usually come up in that sort of a situation, but if it did, I mean, I can count maybe one or two times I've heard somebody say something like that, like, "Oh, she's a slut." I'm like, "Really? Really? All of a sudden she's a slut? Is that because she won't be with you? Now she's a slut, but before she was
Yeah.
okay?"
Yeah.
It's
Although
it's it's
I'm
just
challenging, I want to challenge the idea that women, so what, why does it matter how many partners someone has anyway? But that's something that I'm still, working through
it
myself.
doesn't. I don't think it does. But if we're being honest and we're being factual, the truth is that the more partners you have, the chances of you contracting something are absolutely going to go up.
Oh,
But that's
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But that's it. I mean, if we're going to be honest, but it doesn't mean that just because it doesn't make any freaking sense to me. If a woman likes sex, that should be a good thing, guys. Like, stop.
Yeah.
Don't you,
Yeah.
that's the whole point. That was what you wanted. Why are you shaming her and calling her a slut?
I know it's a lose-lose
Why?
situation. Yeah. Yeah. It's
Doesn't make
totally.
sense. I mean,
Yeah.
unless you're in the bedroom and she wants to be called that, that's totally different. But
Yeah. Tell
that's
me
a
a bit.
different
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. So tell me, you've got books and podcasts, and you're kind of all over the place.
I
What have you-
am. I'm a
so
mess.
Tell me about. I didn't mean in that way, but tell me about
I know.
You've got. I mean, your website is so comprehensive. It's definitely very, very. It's very in depth and very helpful. So, what's the URL?
Askingforafriend.us.
Okay.
And if
Yeah,
you-
that's
if
really
you-
helpful. Yeah.
That's the main website, and yeah, I've been accused of being a bit too comprehensive.
It is very in
Which is-
depth. It's very.
Yeah.
It's not a lightweight website, but the examples of how you can disclose things like that are so
Oh yeah.
helpful.
So if you go to askingforafriend.us and you click on articles, there's a lot of links up there for my books and a whole bunch of other stuff. But I've always believed that people should have free basic information.
Mm-hmm.
Although, since you said it was comprehensive, maybe it's not so easy to read sometimes. But I believe that when I was first diagnosed, there was no information whatsoever. And that's the root of my frustration all the time, which is why I give science, which is why I make the references so people can say, oh my God, okay, this is where he got that from.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to, what you're talking about, dating, so I saw the frustration in what people were doing. Like, how do I tell this person? I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. So I literally wrote a disclosure, Dear John or Dear Joanne letter. And it's called To Whom It May Concern.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a nice, gentle way of disclosing to somebody that you have herpes, that it's not the end of the world, and that this person, that sent you this link and the person that sent you this letter finds enough value in what you have to offer that they're being honest with you. So it goes into a lot more detail.
Yeah.
You can
It's
download
pretty
it
long.
for free.
Yeah, it's a pretty long letter, but it is really good. And yeah.
I shortened it, by the way.
Oh, okay. Now it's like, does it end with LOL?
No.
Is it like text speak now?
No.
With like
no.
a little aubergine, a little
right.
eggplant at the end or something like that.
That's actually not a bad idea. No, but I believe a lot of people had said they liked the letter, but it was a little too much to read. So what I did was I broke it up into part 1 and part 2. So part 1 is just a nice, easy way to explain to somebody your condition, what's going on, and how they feel about it. If they wish to continue on reading, they would click on the bottom and it would take them to part 2, where it describes what herpes is, what it does, blah, 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 blah. It goes into some more detail. So,
yeah, no, it's really, really cool. I still wish that you had the answer of how we can tackle the stigma and the sort of cred.
We never got. So
not the cred, like the reputation. And I feel that is the big question.
Okay, so I don't think we will ever get rid of the stigma, and here's why. I think it's because you're always going to have a handful of people that are going to be unmoved. Always. You know this, and I know this. No matter what we talk about, politics, religion and politics, worst conversation ever. Whether you're talking about your favorite color, your favorort hat. You want to dye your hair blue, and somebody says, oh, I don't like blue. Well, it's not about you. There's always going to be people. So I think deflating the stigma is about enduring it. And that begins, in order to deflate the stigma, we have to educate and deflate perceptions. And that begins with education.
Yeah.
And part of that has to do with understanding the biggest catalyst for the stigma, the biggest piece of the puzzle, which makes the stigma the strongest, and that is our silence. We actually perpetuate the stigma. The stigma is a construct that we allow to take place. If you stand up and you stop caring about what people think and what people say, there's no stigma. There is absolutely no stigma. You take Black Lives Matter, you take Time's Up, Me Too, and all these other social movements, they all have one thing that stands out in most, and that is they no longer remain silent.
Yeah.
That's the biggest part. Silence is the gas pedal to the motor of the stigma. You stop being silent, and anytime somebody says something stupid about herpes, you correct them. All of a sudden, they're like, oh. And it kind of takes them down a notch. And you keep taking down notches, and you keep taking down notches, and guess what? Now those people aren't judging you anymore.
Yeah. No, I totally. So it's a bit like when I first got diagnosed, and I started off by just whispering about it and telling my friends, and here I am making a whole podcast about it. So that is going from 0 to 50 or something like that. And
in 2 seconds.
Educating people. So in terms of what you would add to my sex manifesto, you've almost said it. So what do you think, if there was one thing that you could, wave a magic wand and change and, raise awareness, or like a statement that you would like to put into the sex manifesto, what would it be, Rich?
There is great power in not caring about what people think about you.
Oh, I love that.
If you stop caring about what people think about you, anything is possible. Absolutely anything. Now, I mean, you're going to care about what your family and friends say, and maybe you're going to take it to heart, but anybody else? What people think about me is none of my business.
Yeah.
It has no bearing on what I do.
And also the funniest thing is that when I've been very open about things, sometimes I've been judged by people where I did not expect judgment. And sometimes I have not been judged by people who I thought they might. So we think that we know what other people are going to say or think about us. And yet it might all be rather surprising. Therefore, what is the point of even assuming what they might think when we can't really know?
Exactly.
So I
Right?
think that's really good advice. And I feel like, yeah, so if people went more public with herpes, then there would be some people who are like, whatever, why are you telling me? I'm not really that bothered.
If
And
everybody's talking about it, nobody cares anymore, right?
yes, yes, exactly. And it almost becomes like it should almost be a boring, like we could make it almost, obviously, this podcast is not boring, but we could
Oh,
almost
good.
like take the power away from it by talking
Mm-hmm.
about it more and more. And in the last 2 minutes, do you want to plug your book? You got a new book coming out.
Oh, I have well, I have the my first book is Asking for a Friend, which you can get off my website or Amazon. What I decided to do was I decided to do a kids book. It is the only kids book that talks about cold sores, believe it or not. As far as I know, I've done research on Barnes and Nobles and Amazon and on a few other bookstores, and I have not found any kids books that talk about cold sores. So I wrote one, and it's
Cool.
called "Never Eat Ice Cream Off the Sidewalk."
Uh-huh.
I know it sounds like a very strange name,
Yes.
but
Because you
when
can't
you
get
read the
cold sores
story,
that way.
no. But when you get this story is kind of a cute and funny little story, and that's when you get to the end, you're gonna be like, oh, I get it.
Oh, so you're not going to give the game away. We have to
I can't. But I
okay.
can, I can, it's cute and it's funny and it's about it's about
Uh-huh.
a little girl who wakes up one morning with a cold sore
Mm-hmm.
and she doesn't know what it is, and it ensues with her little brother who is a big pain in the butt,
Mm-hmm.
who is very annoying, and it's their trip to the doctor and
Yeah.
her first lessons in shame and the doctor explaining what this is and a very happy funny ending.
But do people go to the doctor with a cold sore? Would they?
Sometimes,
I suppose if it was bad
sometimes.
enough.
Well, this is kind of just it was kind of an introduction
Yeah.
to allow kids to see, like, oh, wait, so it's okay to
Yeah.
go to the doctor. It's
What
okay
age is your
to talk
book
about
for?
this.
What age group did you say?
9 to 12, 8 to 12.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I could just about read that to my kids. So I'll
Yeah.
have to get a copy and we will put links down below.
Oh,
We'll put
awesome.
links
Thank you.
all over the place so that if people are interested in fighting the shame and stigma and just taking the wind out of the sails of herpes or
Yeah.
something like that.
I don't
Um,
have I'm making I make I have a t-shirt company now and I'm making Stigma t-shirts.
Oh, what does it say on it?
Oh, one says anti STI stigma STI
Okay.
and then
Okay.
stigma.
Yep.
So there's a few on there that are anti-stigma, and I just started uploading more. I wish I had a shirt I was gonna wear it, but I didn't get it in time.
Oh, okay. No worries. We'll have to think of like a female clothing line.
Yep.
Some sort of fabulous dress that I could wear or
Well, there's
pretty
one that
colour.
says Queen Advocate, and there's in different sizes, and there's like a sleeper and a.
Oh, okay. Well, of course, anyone can wear any clothes. So I just meant
is
like
true.
a dress
True.
or something like that. So of course I'd be up for wearing one of your t-shirts. Thank you so much. That was like so much fun talking to you, Rich. And
Oh, awesome! I'm
yeah,
glad, me too.
all the best with your books and the website and everything. So I'll catch up with you soon. You've been listening to the Sex Manifesto with me, Sarah Vaci, where we discuss the unspoken issues surrounding our bodies, sex lives and identities. Next week I speak to Erica Leroy, a sexological body worker, about masturbation, how to feel sexual as a busy mum, and we hear about her unusual performance art. Don't forget to subscribe, new episodes out every Wednesday. And I'd also love to hear your comments and thoughts. You can follow us at sex_manifesto on Twitter.